We're talking today with Charles Lieb of De Pere, Wisconsin. We are at the 2016 Ripcord Association reunion in Springfield, Missouri, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born on October 27th, 1946 in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Okay, did you grow up there or did you move around?
No, I grew up there, went to high school there, and from there I went to West Point.
Okay, what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad worked in the electrical industry.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now, at what point did you become interested in going to West Point?
That's kind of a funny story. One of my best friends in high school always wanted to go to West Point, so I went down with him and took some of the civil service tests. Then we went down. In the meantime, he got recruited to play football at Annapolis at the Naval Academy. So he switched and decided he was going to go to the Naval Academy. And I went down and took Great Lakes Training Center in Chicago and had to take the SAT test, interview, athletic physical training test, and a medical exam. I failed the medical exam, so I went back and brought my results back to my doctor and they said these three things are wrong with me. He checked out and said, they're crazy. In the meantime, I accepted a football scholarship to go to Colorado College in Colorado Springs. And on the 27th of June, I get a telegram saying that I've been accepted to West Point. I have 48 hours to tell them if I'm going to come, and I have to be there on the 1st of July if I'm decided to go. So I sat down and thought about it and said, well, I'll give it a try. As long as if I don't like it, as long as I leave by mid-August, I can go to Colorado College and everything will be fine.
Okay. Now, so do you know what happened? Now, was the medical thing, so you went down to Great Lakes, and that's a naval station.
Yep.
Were you doing that for the Navy, or would it apply to any service branch?
It was for West Point. It was
Okay.
the closest military facility that they could conduct testing for a lot of candidates at one time.
Okay. So do you know what happened? I mean, did your doctor inform them that they were wrong, or?
I didn't even know that he informed them that I was wrong, but I brought back the results,
Okay.
and he tested me out and said, no, this isn't right. They've missed something here, or they screwed this up. So I was completely surprised when I got the telegram on the 27th of July, because I had graduated, assumed I was going to Colorado College, and my friend was going to Annapolis, and that was it. Funny thing is that he quit after the first semester.
Oh, well. Now, Krista, what year was this?
This was 1964.
Okay. Now, and how much awareness did you have of what was going on in the world at that point?
There wasn't all that much going on in the world at that point. When I went to West Point, there was no Gulf of Tonkin, there was no Vietnam War. There were some advisors Kennedy had put in earlier into Vietnam, but it was not a hot spot and was not well known.
Right. What was the appeal to you of a service academy?
I'm not sure, because I think after the first day they kind of break you down and try to mold you into being an officer. I don't really remember that I knew what kind of a service commitment I had when I went there, but turned out we were the first class that had a 5-year commitment, but we were also the first class that got to go home for Christmas, our freshman year.
All right. So you go there in 64, so you show up July 1st of 64. Now, what do they do with you? I mean, do the classes start yet, or is there kind of an orientation period?
There's a 2-month beast barracks, they call it, which is quite intensive training and harassment, really, and then the academic season starts in early September, and you go to school 6 days a week. You take 22 credits a semester, so it's a pretty heavy load, and you're expected to participate in either intramural or intercollegiate sports. And, so it's pretty demanding, and they have you for 11 months of the year. You get 1 month free each summer in between your freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior years. Okay.
Now, in your first year, 64, 65, You get the Gulf of Tonkin incident late in '64, and then the spring of '65, we start sending ground troops into Vietnam. Do you follow those things when you're at West Point?
Yes, they in some of the military classes, they teach you a little bit about what's going on and make you aware of what's happening, along with trying to teach you leadership skills. And they later on they tried to tailor as you got closer to graduation and it was more involved in the Vietnam War. They tried to tailor some of your training more to prepare you for Vietnam.
Okay. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to life at West Point?
It wasn't real easy to adjust because they essentially try to tear you down and build you back up a different way. I adjusted fairly well, I'd say. I did not have a lot of military aptitude. Matter of fact, my roommate had to shine my shoes for me my freshman year because I wasn't very good at doing that. And if you didn't do it well, you'd end up walking the area. I ended up walking the area a few times, and but it was a great experience. Saying you graduated from there, it wasn't necessarily a great experience all 4 years you were there.
All right. Now, aside from doing fairly intense academic load, what other things do you participate in, or what else happens at West Point while you're there?
Well, in between your freshman and sophomore year, you go to a place called Camp Buckner, which is just outside the grounds of West Point, and you do military training for 2 months. That's where you really get exposed to, other than the some academic and close order drill and some of the stuff you learn on the campus, but there you got exposed to the different branches of the Army. You got to shoot cannons, you got to practice squad maneuvers, you got to do a lot of physical and military style training during that time frame. Then between your junior and in between your sophomore and junior year, and in between your junior and senior year, depending on, they have a couple different things you could do. One you'll spend at least a month at West Point, either at Camp Buckner working with the soon-to-be sophomores, or 1 month at Beast Barracks welcoming in the new freshmen. And then you also, the next year, either other year, you'll go on what they call Army orientation training, where they'll send you out to an active Army unit for a month, and you'll perform in the role of a lieutenant in an actual line company. So you got those were kind of the two options you had for your junior, in between your sophomore and junior and senior year.
Okay. And so, which of those did you wind up doing?
I ended up going back, being a squad leader at Beast Barracks for some new cadets coming in, and then the following year I went to Fort Carson, Colorado for a month, serving in a mechanized infantry platoon.
Okay. Now, how does that work? Because these people know you're a West Point cadet and like not a real officer yet. Do they just treat you like an officer, or what happens?
They're pretty good at treating you like an officer. Now you get, you have some that like to play little games with you. Some old E7 motor pool sergeant had me searching all over for the Johnson rod on the M113 armored personnel carrier, which unfortunately there isn't one, but it took me a long time to figure that out. So, but most of the time they treat you just as they would treat a lieutenant.
Okay. Now, did you get to go into New York City at all while you're at West Point?
Sure. We went down. Army made the NIT basketball tournament when I was a plebe. We also played Syracuse down in New York City, so we got to go there. West Point, you don't really, the freshman year you don't get to leave, except we got 2 weeks of Christmas. But you have no passes to go out post. As a sophomore, I think you get 1 a semester, and as a junior you get 2 a semester. As a senior you can leave anytime. on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
So over the years, you spent more time, or you joined, like I joined the French club. So I didn't speak French, I didn't take French, but my roommate was the head of the French club, and he had some great trips to New York City. So I joined the French club and go down with that. And then also I played lacrosse. So in the spring, we were traveling all over the country playing lacrosse games against other teams.
Okay. And another thing that I've heard is that you get a lot of people coming into West Point to meet you, even as high up as General Westmoreland. Do you remember any of that?
Yes, we have quite a few dignitaries come in, and they give speeches and talk to the cadets about various things. The best part was, excuse me, we had been at I think I was a senior, and we'd been at a game at Notre Dame, and my girlfriend, soon to become my wife, was there at the game, and I got what they call the 15 and 20, 15 demerits and 20 hours on the area for something they call public display of affection. I can't understand that. But the best thing that happened was the next week, the president of Nicaragua came, who was a former West Point graduate, and a president of a foreign country can grant amnesty to all the cadets. So he came and stood up in the mess hall in Washington Hall and granted amnesty, so all sins were forgiven. So that was memorable for me.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you remember Westmoreland visiting, or?
I do remember Westmoreland visiting. We had good pasture visit. We had quite a few. Matter of fact, one of my instructors was Pete Dawkins. Another one was Norman Schwarzkopf. So we were exposed to a lot of good military minds and good military ideas, I think.
Okay. And now, are you following the progress of the Vietnam War while you're there?
As you get closer to graduation, it becomes much more important that you follow that. Once you start your junior year, then if you quit after that, you have a commitment in the Army either way, whether you graduate or not. So people paid much more attention to what was happening in Vietnam as it heated up.
Mm-hmm. All right. So when do you actually graduate from West Point?
June 5th, 1968.
Okay. And what is your next step?
The next step was I got married on June 29th. But then I chose infantry. They have a branch selection process, and it goes by class rank. So infantry wasn't necessarily a real popular one to choose, but I chose infantry. So after 2 months leave, I report to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I go to Airborne School, Infantry Officer Basic Course, and Ranger School.
And is there a sequence there? I mean, do you do Infantry Officer Basic first, or?
Went to Airborne School first,
Okay.
then went to Infantry Officer Basic Course, then went to Ranger School.
Okay. Now, what do those programs actually consist of?
Airborne School, they teach you how to jump out of perfectly good airplanes, and you get to jump out of a variety of airplanes, including helicopters. So there's a physical aspect to that training. The Infantry Officer Basic Course teaches you generally how to be an infantry platoon leader and an infantry company commander. It's really for those steps in the process, and that's, I don't know, I think that was Airborne School was a 3-week school. I think Infantry Officer Basic Course was maybe 16 weeks, and then Ranger School was 9 weeks, 8 or 9 weeks.
All right. Now, did the Infantry Officer Basic, was it all on the grounds of Fort Benning, or did you go anywhere else?
No, all on the grounds of Fort Benning.
Okay. And what kind of people were training you at that point?
All of our instructors were officers or enlisted men, so a lot of them had Vietnam experience, just come back from Vietnam. So that is, they were teaching you a lot of what to expect if knowing that you were probably going to Vietnam in the not too distant future. So they were preparing you for that, and also teaching you, refining your knowledge of basic infantry tactics and how to do various things.
Okay. Now, how did they just treat you? I mean, was this like a basic training kind of thing where they're beating you down, or?
No, not the Infantry Officer Basic Course. Airborne School, they try to beat people down a little bit. In Ranger School, they really try to beat people down.
Okay. Where do they do the Ranger School?
Ranger School has 3 phases. Phase 1 is on Fort Benning, Georgia. Phase 2, they take you up to the mountains in Dahlonega, Georgia. And Phase 3, they take you down to the swamps and around Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. I was what they call a winter ranger, because I went from end of October and graduated just before Christmas. I'm one of the few that can say that I got frostbite in Florida.
Mm-hmm. All right. So when do you finish all of this?
Finish it just before Christmas.
Okay. And then what do they do with you?
You got to choose your first assignment from West Point. I had chosen to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So in January, I reported in. After Christmas, I reported into Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was with the 2nd Battalion of the 504th Infantry, Devils in Baggy Pants. I started out as a new second lieutenant. They put me as the S1 of the battalion, which was a captain's job, and not exactly what I wanted to do, but I got to do that for a few months, and I got to be a platoon leader.
Okay. As the S1, was that basically an executive officer?
The admin officer,
okay.
Personnel officer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so less interesting than some of the other possibilities.
Yes.
Okay. Why did you choose Fort Bragg?
Because I didn't want to really volunteer for Vietnam. You could get a second lieutenant didn't make a lot of money then, and that was an airborne assignment, so you got an extra $110 a month airborne pay. And the 82nd was a good unit, had good reputation, was doing some interesting things. So I thought that'd be a good place to go.
All right. And how long did you wind up staying with them?
6 months.
Okay. And was it this understanding this was going to be a temporary assignment, and did you still assume you were going to go to Vietnam, or did you think there might be other places you would go?
No, I pretty much knew that almost all my class went from wherever they went on their first assignment, their second assignment was Vietnam. Several volunteered to go to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. All right, so when do you get word that you're going to Vietnam?
Probably got orders in May of 1969.
Okay. And then how much time do you have to get organized before you ship out?
Well, I took, I left Fort Bragg in late June, mid to late June. And my wife and I decided we were going to go to Europe for 35 days. So we go up to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, and we wait a few days and catch a free hop over to Madrid, Rota, Spain,
Mm-hmm.
and we work our way to Madrid. And this was truly Europe on $5 a day back then. And we took the train and we went around Europe for Spain, France, Italy, Austria, and then up to Germany. But we got stuck in Germany trying to get back because I had to be in Vietnam, I think on the 11th or 12th of August, and it was getting to be the end of July, and we show up at Rhine, Main, and outside of Munich, trying to catch a flight back. And it so happens that all the dependents that their fathers are stationed in Europe, but they were sent home went to school in the United States, then came back, and now they were heading back. Well, they all had priority over active duty military, so we sat in the Rhine, Main airport for 11 days trying to get back, and it was getting close. Finally, we caught a flight to Mildenhall, England, and showed up there. I had no money, and I had to be in Vietnam. I had to catch a flight to Vietnam in 4 days, so they couldn't give me a flight out of there, but they gave me, I had to go to the Air Force finance officer, and they gave me money, and I bought a ticket. Went down to London, bought a ticket, flew back to New York City, got my car. We drove straight through to Minneapolis, was there for a day, and then I caught a flight to Travis Air Force Base, and then went from there over to Vietnam.
All right. And then how do they actually get you to Vietnam from Travis?
Took a commercial or a charter flight.
And do you remember where you stopped?
Yeah, we stopped in the Philippines.
Okay. And did you get off the plane, or you just?
Got to get off the plane, but it was like a 2 hour, an hour and a half stop. Nothing spectacular.
Now, where do officers, or at least, you still a second lieutenant at this point? Or are you
No,
first
I'm a
lieutenant?
first lieutenant.
Okay. So do you get to sit up front, or are you still in the back with the guys?
It's open seating.
Okay. So
So whoever gets on first gets whatever seat they want.
no first class for officers then?
No first class for officers.
All right. Where do you land in Vietnam?
I land in Benoit Air Force Base and get out there. Let me digress a minute. When we were in McGuire Air Force Base waiting to catch a flight over to Europe, I ran into a guy by the name of Glenn Hale, who was we called him Ranger Hale. He was a year ahead of me at West Point, and I had played lacrosse with him. He had just spent a year in Vietnam with the 101st and had extended for 6 months to be a company commander. I was going over unassigned, which means I didn't have a unit, so we're sitting there in talking about his Vietnam experiences and how we're going to Europe, and then I'm going to Vietnam. He says, well, give me a copy of your orders, and I'll see if I can't get you in my company. So I end up showing up at Benoit with orders unassigned, and lo and behold, I'm signed to Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Infantry, and Ranger Hale is the company commander.
All right. Now, what's your first impression of Vietnam when you get there?
It's somewhat of a scary. You're obviously have some adrenaline running, and I think there was some incoming fire taken the first night we were there, and so and it's certainly a different climate than the Minnesota that I was used to. So and actually it's a pretty country. It can be a very beautiful country in various places.
Right. Okay. And then how long did you have to stay at Benoit?
I think 2 days is all, and they sent me on a flight up to Camp Evans.
Now, where, for people who aren't aware, where in South Vietnam was the 101st stationed?
They're in northern I Corps, up fairly close to the demilitarized zone, north of Da Nang, north of Hue.
Okay. And this is also the area where you had the Hamburger Hill fight had gone on in '69 and this kind of thing. So it's where a lot of the actual fighting was going on.
Well, yeah, it's the A Shau Valley runs through there, which is the main supply route from North Vietnam down to South Vietnam, and we had the Marines north of us at that time, so they had right along the DMZ, and the 101st was the next line of defense as you headed south.
All right. Now, what kind of reception do you get when you arrive at Camp Evans? I mean, is the company in the field at that point?
Company's in the field. I come in, another lieutenant and I came in at the same time. I think we spent one night there, and then the next day we were sent out to our platoons.
Okay. So you didn't get a divisional orientation course or anything like that?
No. Well, you had a little bit of an orientation course. In a couple of days you were down in Cameron or in Benoit before you went up north.
Right. But you're pretty much expected to know what to do.
Yeah.
Okay. And so how do they get you out to the field?
Helicopter.
Okay. And what kind of terrain were they in when you joined them?
They were in the lowlands, operating in between the water and the mountains, just probably east of Camp Evans.
Okay. And what were they doing?
They're conducting ambushes and searching for enemy activity.
Okay, and was there much?
Not in that area at that time. It was pretty quiet.
Okay, and you go, so you join them, and so you meet Captain Hale again, and he tells you what to do, or
No,
is he not there?
I go right out to the platoon because it was a platoon-size operation.
All right.
Captain Hale was with a different platoon,
Mhm.
and I have a E6 by the name of Staff Sergeant Queen that was the acting platoon leader and also the platoon sergeant.
Mhm.
So I take over the platoon from him. He was a great guy. He was a very sharp NCO. He was a shake and bake, which meant he got came into the Army, went to special training, and came out as an E5, and had been there for probably 3 or 4 months already. So
So he had learned something about
yeah,
what to do.
yeah.
All right. Now, how did you approach the problem of taking over the platoon? I mean, did you kind of go in and assert yourself, or did you look around first, or?
Well, I called Sergeant Queen up and spent some time talking to him, called the squad leaders up, then I went around and met everybody in the platoon, introduced myself, tried to learn something about them so that we could communicate, and,
Mhm.
it was interesting because there were a lot of young people from a lot of different walks of life. A lot of them not there because they wanted to be there. They were draftees, so it was an interesting experience. But they were very, very good troops.
Mm-hmm. All right. So when you're first starting to patrol, are you giving out orders right away, or are you just kind of communicating with Sergeant
giving
Queen?
orders right away, taking charge, and we're moving out.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, did it help probably that you were not in a lot of action or not having to get big firefights right away?
I think so. It certainly gave you a little chance to meet and know your people and learn about them, and learn some of the capabilities and who you could count on and who did what best.
Mm-hmm. All right. About how long do you think you stayed in that lowlands area?
We were probably there for maybe 4 or 5 days, and we came back to Camp Evans,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I first met Captain Hale again.
Mm-hmm. All right. And now, did you stay in Camp Evans long, or do you go
No.
back out? And
No.
when you go out in the field, is it in the same area, or do you go to the hills? Or
We went to wherever they wanted to send us, so
Mhm.
but we went to a lot of different areas and saw a lot of different terrain, and I can truthfully say that we were never in any villages or the whole year I was there and I was out in the field,
Mhm.
essentially the whole year. We were never in villages, so whenever you encountered somebody, you could assume they were the enemy.
Mm-hmm. I guess there were some villages sort of around the camps and right along the coast, but that's not. But you weren't patrolling into those.
Nope,
Yeah.
never had any activity
Yeah.
near any of them.
And the hills had largely been emptied of their civilian populations by that time.
Yes.
Yeah, that's sort of part of protecting them or whatever it was that we were doing out there. Yeah. So, were there any mountain yards still out there that you were aware of, or?
No.
Okay. All right. So, so when did you actually arrive in Vietnam or join the unit chronologically?
Probably, I think I got to Vietnam like the 11th of August, and I probably joined the unit about the 14th or 15th of August.
Now, were they still going back into the Aisha Valley at that point, or?
Not right then.
Okay.
Matter of fact, we were patrolling mostly in the low areas and the foothills of the mountains.
Okay. And do you remember kind of the first real contact you had with the enemy?
Yeah. We were, excuse me, we were getting out in platoon size activities, and this was, I think this was early October, and we were set up, we hid during the day and we were set up ambushes at night, and one night we were moving out. I had probably, it was just the second platoon, we had probably 24, 26 people. And we hear this noise coming the other way, so we dropped down dropped down off near the trail we were, dropped off down below, and just listened because there was a lot of noise. And that night, a whole bunch of enemy went by us. We called in artillery on them, and don't know what happened. So we went back, and the next night, as we were moving out, we came to a little stream bed. There was a stream crossing, or a trail and a stream. As we're getting there, we hear noise coming from the other direction again. So this time we set up a hasty ambush and got most of the people up on the hill looking down on the stream crossing and the trail there. And I think I had one machine gun team left on the other side of the trail, other side of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And a bunch of enemy come by, and this time we opened fire on them, and it lasts for, because this was probably just near dusk. It probably lasts for 3 hours that we're firing, and finally, and we're calling in artillery, and we're calling in gunships, and when it's all over, we actually ended up capturing 3, and I think there were 12 dead NBA. We had 2 wounded, so we can't. That was good for us, but it turns out that once they took the 3 that we captured back and interrogated them, it had been a battalion of NBA moving through the area, and we had caught the front edge of it, and luckily they didn't realize how few we were and how many they were, and they went around and changed directions. But that was our first event.
Mm-hmm. All right, but they weren't, I guess on some level, they weren't very cautious.
No, I don't think they expected anybody to be there.
Now, was this hill country you were in at the time, or was this the lowlands area?
It was kind of a little bit of both.
Foothills-ish.
Yeah.
So not up in the real steep mountains
No.
and things like that at that point. All right. So they just kind of figured that it was sort of their territory and they could move back and forth as they
Yep.
pleased, and you were interrupting them. Okay. Now, over the next several months then, kind of late 69, early 70, were there many more contacts of that size or smaller ones?
We had a lot more smaller ones. We were somewhat, you could either call us the lucky or unlucky platoon, because I think I kept track in between November and March. Charlie Company, 2nd of 506th Infantry was in, I think I counted 36 encounters with the enemy, and something like 29 of them 2nd Platoon was involved in. So yeah, we had lots of opportunities. The next big opportunity is we went up to cover for the withdrawal of the 1st Marine Division. So we went up to the rock pile, and we combat assaulted in just on the south side of the DMZ, and first time we ever took enemy artillery fire coming in, because they were firing from the other side of the DMZ at you, and that's the first time I got wounded, was up there. We had combat assaulted in, and Captain Hale had us move down a ridge line, we went this way, and then he said, no, come back and go through the 3rd platoon and go up this ridge line. And so we went up that ridge line, we got ambushed, or fell into an ambush. Mm-hmm. And we had 2 men killed, the only 2 I lost when I was there. And I got wounded, and we ended up having to call in aerial rocket ships almost right on top of us, because they're dug in bunkers up there, and so I got evacuated to the 85th Evac Hospital in Da Nang, and then they wanted to send me to Camp Zama, Japan, and I didn't want to go because I knew if I went, then I'd be gone for a long time. Then I'd be coming back to Vietnam, and I want to go back to my unit.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, the monsoons hit when I was in the 95th Evac, and they couldn't get, or the 85th Evac, I guess, and they couldn't get planes in for 2 days. And by that time, I had convinced the doctor that I wasn't as badly hurt as he thought, and so I got to go back to my unit. And the highlight was Ron Ely Tarzan came and visited me while I was in the hospital.
All right. Where were you hit?
The most damaging blows were actually to the elbow and in here, but I had shrapnel all up and down primarily the backside.
Okay, so the blast from an artillery shell or mortar round or something?
These were actually grenades.
Okay.
We were that close.
All right. But so shallow wounds, not breaks of bones or anything like that?
No.
Okay. I'm going to pause right here. Show the age intervention. Now, did you find in those first months being there, as you begin to get into combat, that your training had worked well?
Yes, I was really, compared to those that came from OCS and ROTC, I thought that I was very well prepared for being a lieutenant in Vietnam, an infantry lieutenant in Vietnam.
Okay, so what's the difference, do you think?
Well, you have a lot more military schooling, you're exposed to a lot more. Ranger school is a very grueling 8 or 9 week adventure, and I think all those things help prepare you much better for life in combat in Vietnam.
So when you first come under fire, you're not pausing and thinking what you're supposed to be doing, or do you do a little of that and it goes away?
Well, I think you react. The first thing you do is react, and you have to provide some guidance to your troops, but they react too. They've been there, most of them have been there for a while, and it's not their first firefight either, so they know what to do, but they just need some guidance and direction sometimes. And we had some very, very good troops. I still remember a lot of them, and remember how brave they were, and how they bonded together. Everybody was covering everybody's back, and it was really a team when you were out in the field. So that was a great camaraderie, I guess.
Okay. How do you characterize Captain Hale as a commander?
Captain Hale was a very aggressive commander. He, well, they nicknamed him Ranger when he was in West Point, and he was very, what we call gung-ho, and he ended up commanding several Ranger units throughout his Army career. But he was intense, but skilled and knew his stuff, and looked out after his troops. So I thought he was an excellent company commander.
Okay. Now, did you have sort of standard operating procedures that maybe were his? When you go through the jungle, for instance, do you go on trails or off trails?
Depends. Most of the time he tried to stay off the trails if possible, because trails were often booby-trapped, and that's how people got hurt and got killed. So sometimes it's so thick, or sometimes you have to move more quickly, or sometimes the only way to get there someplace is to follow a trail. So sometimes you do that, but you tried to avoid them whenever you could.
Okay. And when you're out, and particularly when you're out, your platoon is by itself overnight. Are there standard procedures that you have in place, or things that you want to make sure your men are doing?
You set up a perimeter. You make sure that everybody's dug in wherever possible. They have guard assignments. You try to put out an outpost or a listening post to provide you some advance warning if somebody's coming. There's pretty standard procedures.
Okay. And I've heard different things at different times, rules about, would people smoke out there at night, or were there rules about that?
You tried to keep them from smoking at night because there was a signature that you could see from a ways away of a. So if they're going to smoke, they had to do it under a poncho liner or something like that. But we had really pretty good discipline in that. That was, during the day there was a lot of smoking, but during the night there wasn't all that much. We tried to discourage that.
All right. Now, at a certain point in here, the company commander changes. So when does that happen?
Company commander Captain Hale leaves at just around the end of December, 1st of January. Captain Vasquez comes in.
All right. What sort of character was he?
Captain Vasquez was a very unique guy. He was a enlisted man that had gotten a direct commission to an officer. He had lots of experience. Sometimes he was difficult to understand because he had a heavy Puerto Rican accent, but he knew his stuff, and he was forceful in letting people know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it.
Now, did it help you probably to deal with him because you'd had Captain Hale before that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it did. Captain Hale was strict and quite knowledgeable. Captain Vasquez had a different set of knowledge, but it was probably much more vast. I don't know. He'd probably been in the Army for 20-some years before he became our company commander.
Pretty close, because he went in during Korea.
Yeah.
So, all right. Now, did you continue? So you had gone up to the DMZ area when Hale was still the captain. Now that you've got Vasquez, is it now back to your usual areas in a little bit farther south?
A little bit farther south, yes.
Okay.
One of the things that's happened under Captain Vasquez, though, we spent we went out for like 45 days and never came back. Mm-hmm. And that had never happened before, but we were operating in platoon size, and we'd get picked up and moved from one area to another, and we were out in the field for a long time.
Okay, so what do you do about food and supplies and things while you're out that long?
Well, depending on the weather, depending on where you were, but maybe every third day you'd get a resupply.
Okay, and how does that come in?
Helicopter.
And what do they bring out to you?
Sea rations and water, and mail.
Mm-hmm. Did they give you changes of clothing once in a while, or?
Not really.
Not that you remember? Okay. Because I guess there's some periods there when it's wet enough that doesn't the clothing kind of rot off of you?
This is, well, yeah, socks, you went through socks. This was, what, probably mid-January till the end of February. Right. We were probably out there the whole time, operating in platoon size, or even sometimes smaller, break it up into half platoon size operations. And I didn't see Captain Vasquez very much because he left me alone. He spent more time with a couple of the other platoons than the second platoon.
Okay. Now, when you did have him with you, did he just let you do your stuff, or was he looking over your shoulder?
Now, he pretty much, I didn't have him with me very much at all, and he pretty much let us do our stuff when he was with us.
All right. Now, as we move forward in time, get down to March, they begin the efforts to set up a fire base on a hilltop they'll call Ripcord. Now, initially, other companies are the ones that are attempting to go in. So there's one effort in March and then one on the 1st of April. Now, was your company kind of operating in that area when those events happened?
Well, in the middle of March, I was pulled out from being a platoon leader, and I was moved up to the battalion I became the battalion liaison officer first, and I became the battalion S3 Air. So I left Charlie Company probably mid-March, and actually right after I left them, I went to battalion headquarters for, I don't know, maybe a week. Then they sent me out with the first ARVNs on a Firebase. So I had an RTO and me, and we were the only English-speaking people on the Firebase. So we were coordinating with the first ARVN battalion that had set up a Firebase, providing artillery support for the attempts to move into the Ashaw Valley and establish a Firebase on Ripcord.
Okay, so when was that in terms of time frame that you were with them?
I think I was out there from maybe 8 to 10 days in mid to late March.
Okay.
Because I remember what happened was I was supposed to be going on R&R in late March, and I was on this Firebase with the ARVNs, and we were socked in and we were taking incoming fire, and they couldn't get any aircraft in, so my wife was in Hawaii waiting for me for 3 days, meeting every plane, wondering when I was going to show up, and every time the Red Cross or the person would have to come, oh no, he's not on this flight, he's okay, he says, it scared the living daylights out of her. And finally, funny thing is the first airplane we get in, or first helicopter come in, is Major General Wright, the division commander of the 101st Airborne Division. He picks me up and takes me back to Camp Evans, where I then get on a flight and go to Hawaii to meet my wife.
Okay. What impression did you have of the ARVNs while you were with them?
The 1st ARVN's division was a very good division. They were probably the cream of the crop of the ARVN units over there. They were really squared away, dedicated, a very good fighting force. It was a little difficult because they didn't speak English, I didn't speak Vietnamese, but I'd attend their briefings and see what they were doing, and saw how they reacted to incoming fire, and I was impressed with the 1st ARVN Division.
Okay. And did you have an interpreter?
There was an interpreter there, yes, but he wasn't mine, he was theirs.
Okay. But, I mean, would you communicate through him?
I could communicate through him, but most of my job was to get information from the battalion to pass on to them, and get information from them to pass back on to the 2nd and 506. So.
Okay. All right. So, and was that, so then you go up, then you go to Hawaii, and when you come back from Hawaii, do you go back to the ARVNs, or do you go back to the battalion?
I go back to the TOC of the 2nd and 506, and by that, so I was there when they finally got on Ripcord and were setting up the Firebase, and then I was on Ripcord until I got wounded for the 3rd time, and 2 days before the Firebase was evacuated.
All right. Now, when the first attempt to set something up was, I think, the 12th of March or thereabouts, an Alpha company tried to land and then left. Were you with the battalion at that point, still with your, or with the ARVNs, or remember where you were?
I think I might have still been with Charlie Company, and
Okay.
was leaving Charlie Company within a few days of that.
All right. And then you were not there on April 1st when B Company went in and went off again?
No,
Okay.
I was in Hawaii.
All right. And then get into April, and finally Charlie Company goes up the hill and starts setting up the base. So what's your role then at that point?
I was still, I think I became the S3 Air at that time, so I was kind of assistant to Major Koningsbauer. Once we got established out there, I'd man the radio traffic during the evening hours. I'd call in clearance and called in a lot of airstrikes. We had something called the beacon drop, where we had this little kind of like a radio that put beacon, and you could communicate with fast-moving aircraft and direct them into where to put in airstrikes. So those were kind of the primary duties I did during that time frame.
Okay. And so did you spend your time, were you based on the fire base itself or back at Camp Evans?
On the fire base itself.
Okay. Now describe a little bit what the setup was there. If you're trying to explain to somebody what Ripcord looked like or what you had there.
Okay, well, on top of the fire base you had two batteries of artillery, a 155 and a 105. Down a little bit from that you had the tactical communications bunker. Then down farther from that you had several strands of concertina wire and the fighting positions for those that were involved in guarding the fire base. You had a big rock that had a quad 50 next to it on one end of it. You had a ammo dump where they bring in the artillery. You had the mortars dug in a little bit down below the artillery. You had later on they brought in Conex containers that had some, I think they're ASA or secure spooks people that were monitoring NBA broadcasts or message traffic. Of course, you had a couple landing pads where helicopters could come in, people could come in, land, take off. You had a mess hall, you had bunkers where people that lived there like me had had a little space.
Okay. Now, sort of April, May, June, that period, what was going on and around the fire base?
Well, we had, there wasn't, in April and May, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of activity. We were holding the fire base, we had units out patrolling around, looking for the enemy. I think starting, my memory, my recollection might be a little different but I thought starting June 1st, every day from then until July 23rd, we took some incoming fire. So starting in late May, early June, things started to heat up quite significantly in the area of operations we were, as the NBA started to move troops in and tried to eliminate our harassment of their attempts to move supplies and men down the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Right. Because the fire base was sort of located just sort of north of the valley, and you're there to interdict their movement, basically.
I also remember that this was the time when everybody else was focused on the U.S. going into Cambodia and Laos, so nobody knew much about what was happening in northern I Corps, and we never. There are no reporters, no news about Ripcord. I thought we were sent out there to find the enemy, and we were quite successful in finding them. But once we found them, we didn't really take advantage of what we had accomplished very well.
All right. Well, now, how much of a sense did you have that the enemy were building up, or at what point do you realize, okay, this is not the way things used to be?
Well, April went along fairly quiet. May, towards the end of May, things started to build up, and then in June there were started to be much more frequent contact with the enemy forces around. We started getting, like I said, in June, just about every day. I think every day we had some incoming fire of some sort. And then July, things really started picking up, and by end of June, early July, we knew there were quite a few in the area, and that if we were the bait, they had sucked into the trap. But we didn't close the jaws very well.
All right. Now, you're in a position to kind of know a lot of the commanders and be aware of a fair amount of what was actually happening, a little bit bigger picture than men out in the field might have at this point. Now, you would have worked with two different brigade commanders, right? I mean, there was a
Bradley and
Bradley, and then Harrison. Did you have much contact with Bradley, or much of a sense of what kind of leader he was?
Bradley communicated mostly with Lucas. He'd come out every now and then, and obviously we heard some of the orders he had. Bradley was a kind of a more of a soldier, I would guess, down a little more down to earth, and then Harrison was a great guy, but they were different personalities and different ways of doing things. Bradley was maybe a little more flamboyant and direct, I guess. And Harrison was always a gentleman and very intelligent, grasped things quite well, but their styles were a little different.
Okay. And then the battalion commander of 2506, Colonel Lucas, what impression did you have of him?
Colonel Lucas was a very brave man. I think he got himself in a little over his head there, and that didn't stop him. He was quite aggressive and demanding, but unfortunately, some of the things he asked people to do probably, in retrospect, weren't the best decisions.
I mean, my impression has been, and I realize that as interviewer I shouldn't be throwing this kind of thing in, but is that he didn't really have any kind of field experience for the kind of work that the men on the ground
being asked to do,
were doing. So he didn't really understand what it was like to be them, and didn't go out and try it.
Well, when you're a lieutenant colonel, you're not supposed to be down there leading the platoon up the hill, but he should have had some training and experiences as a company commander someplace before, maybe not in combat, but he and I don't know what his background was prior to coming to...
He had been within some kind of, I think, advising commander on Saigon previously.
Okay.
So he didn't have a combat command. But, yeah. And now, of course, Harrison had been in helicopters before that. Did you have a sense that he had a better feel for what the enlisted men were going through?
I didn't have all that much contact with him, because he'd be flying up above, but he'd come down occasionally to visit on Fire Support Base Ripcord, and I was never back in the 3rd Brigade with him there at his headquarters, so the only I knew of him through radio communications, and I think, like I said, he impressed me always as a very knowledgeable guy, really a true gentleman is the best way to put it. So you don't expect, you're not looking for gentlemen necessarily in combat sometimes, but I thought he was certainly a very dedicated, knowledgeable person.
All right. Now, as things move forward, okay, now, how much contact do you have up in the base with the units that are down on the ground?
They'd report into me their defensive positions every night. I'd be monitoring their radio traffic. I'd alert them to when they were going to be picked up and moved to someplace else. So I had a fair amount of interplay with the companies.
All right. Now, on July 2nd, you're going to get the first kind of big action, I guess, at a place called Hill 902. 2 platoons of Charlie Company are there, and they get hit by sappers. And that gets fairly dramatic. Were you listening to that while that was happening?
Yes.
All right. And what impression did you have from the hilltop, or what kinds of things were you trying to do for them?
Well, you're trying to just make sure that they had air support, artillery. You're trying to get casualty counts. I actually went out with the 3rd platoon the next morning we CA'd into 902 to assess the damage and see what was happening there.
And what did you see when you got there?
Saw way too many dead Americans and dead Vietnamese. We had to go around and go from hold to hold to see who was still there, pull them together, and get body bags for those who were killed. One person all we found was a boot with a dog tag on it. I had to communicate back to the battalion headquarters who was dead, who was alive, how many injured we had. It was, and there was some thought that when we went in there that the North Vietnamese had withdrawn and they were going to wait for whoever came in the next morning to try to attack them as they came in to try to help what was left of Charlie Company at the time.
All right. Now, so just as a reminder, now you had been with 2nd Platoon?
Yes.
Okay, so some of your own men
Yes.
got hit there. All right. Now, so that, I mean, does that kind of change how you look at things, or how the headquarters people are looking at the campaign at this point? Was this, or were you, it was just part of what could happen?
902 was a sad thing, a very sad thing, because under Captain Vasquez, Charlie Company was a pretty finely tuned fighting force.
I need to pause here because this tape is up. Now, we were talking about the incident in Hill 902, and you were starting to raise question of what might have happened had Captain Vasquez still been commanding that company, because he had rotated out by then.
There was no way that Captain Vasquez would allow Charlie Company to stay on 902 2 nights in a row, especially with the enemy activity below. So I don't know what happened, or and I don't remember why, but Charlie Company staying up there 2 nights in a row was not a good decision, whoever made that. I don't know if that was Captain Hewitt or Colonel Lucas that determined that they should stay there, but at that stage, that was asking for trouble, and it certainly ended up happening that way. Plus, I don't think they had an outpost out, which they should have. Some of the older ones probably dug in deeper holes, but some of the new ones, I heard Captain Hewitt was in a hammock above the ground. That might have been when he had spent time as an advisor with the Arvins, and that might have been acceptable there, but that certainly was not what was expected where we were, the type of positions that you would be in when you're in a combat area. So there were mistakes made, and we paid for it. And the other thing that was, I found out later that since I was on the fire base, right next to that Connex container with the ASA, that they knew that a sapper attack was going to hit Charlie Company on that hill that night, and they claim they reported to Lucas, but nobody else can verify that. But most of the reporting all went straight to Saigon into classified channels, because they had access to North Vietnamese communications, and they didn't want people to know that they had access, so they were hush-hush about what they heard. But there was a staff sergeant in E5 there, and after I got back from going to 902 that morning, and I learned that they knew about that, we had a little discussion, and from that point forward we got informed of anything in our area of operations that would impact us without because they had very strict orders of the chain of command or channels they were supposed to report things through. That's a shame that they knew they were on the fire base and they didn't let us know.
Yeah.
Because we could, I'm not sure what we could have done at that time, because it was a 3:30 in the morning attack on the hill, but if we'd known beforehand, we could have at least alerted Charlie Company, and maybe they could have taken some different actions.
Yeah, 'cause it is pretty clear from the accounts of the men on that hill that they didn't, while they knew that something could happen, they did not have any kind of warning that had gotten to them, and I guess the officers who were there didn't know either, so we don't have Captain Hewitt because he was killed, but the lieutenants who were there didn't know anything either. So, yeah. And fundamentally, what was wrong about staying in the same place 2 nights in a row?
Well, first of all, they had encountered, there was, I guess, just down below the hill, there was a enemy mortar area where they were firing mortars from, and they had shot some laws down into the area, and they had discovered enemy there. So the enemy knew that they were up there. They'd been there one night already, and that would give them time to scout out the positions. I think they stayed there all day, which is dumb. In my opinion, dumb. I don't know why they weren't moving to another position or going down to the take over the pits where the mortars were, but they just kind of lollygagged. Well, lollygagged isn't a good word, but they spent the day there and then spent a second night. And with the number of enemy forces in the area, they became a prime target.
Right. Okay. Now, after that, there are a number of firefights that take place in the hills surrounding Ripcord over the next couple of weeks. There was action in Hill 805, there's Hill 1000. What do you recall about some of those?
I recall, I don't remember much about 805, so
Okay.
I'll take that out of the equation. Hill 1000, you can see Hill 1000. It's a little taller than Ripcord, not very far away, and I don't remember exactly when, but there was, I think it was after we tried to attack it one day, I ended up putting in airstrikes, and for 6 hours, I had fast movers and even A1Es on station, and we just bombed the heck out of Hill 1000 and dropped everything. I mean, we had them lined up coming in and hitting that hill, but we hadn't been successful. Delta Company tried to go up and actually left a couple people there and came back down, and then Charlie Company was ordered to go up. They had more success and got closer to the top, and then they were told to come down, and Delta, they were supposed to meet Delta, but Delta never made it back up on the other side, and they discovered all kinds of bunkers, so that was a well dug in enemy. They had tunnels and bunkers in that hill, and it had been quite a hubbub of enemy activity not very far away from Ripcord. So
they were dug in deeply enough that the aerial bombardment wouldn't matter.
Didn't make any difference.
And even if you were to clear out the bunker that was actually facing out, there's stuff behind it and they can just come back in. And at that point, you weren't aware that the enemy had that kind of facility there?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, you'd had found them in other places. I mean, Hamburger Hill, I think, was kind of like that too. But was that something you suspected or nobody talked about, or?
I don't. If we knew about it, I don't think we would have gone right next door to Ripcord and made a fire base there.
Yeah.
In some ways, no. Hill 1000 was much more forested and covered than Ripcord had been. But that's the higher ground. Typically, you'd like to have your fire base on the most prominent terrain feature around. So I don't think we had much knowledge of what was on Hill 1000 at that time. I'm not aware of any intelligence reports saying that it was, until we went up there, excuse me, encountered the bunkers and the NBA there.
All right. Now, I guess they also were bringing in other units. So 2nd Battalion, the 501st comes through. Did you have much contact with them, or did other people communicate with them?
Didn't have a lot of contact with we were there together for a while, but then, you know, we got taken off Ripcord for a while. And I think the 2nd and 501st or somebody else was there, and then we came back out, but not long. We were taken off maybe 4 days or something.
Well, there was a stand down
Yeah.
in June, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we didn't, you know, they were kind of shared talks next to each other, and we communicated with each other, but it was, we did mostly, I think the battalion commanders and the brigade commander talked about who was responsible for what.
Mm-hmm.
We worried most about what the 2nd and 506 was doing,
Right.
not about what the 2nd and 501st was doing.
Okay. Now, over the course of the first 3 weeks of July, was the bombardment getting more intense? Were you getting more incoming?
Yes.
Okay. And what kinds of things were they shooting at you?
Well, you get mortar fire, get recoilless rifle fire, you get some small arms fire,
The rockets?
rockets. Yeah, we got rocket fire. Just about everything they had in their arsenal, they were firing at us, and they had us pretty well zeroed in because we weren't going anywhere.
All right. Now, I guess a major incident there is that a few days before the eventual evacuation, a Chinook helicopter bringing in ammunition gets shot down, and that blows a lot of things up on the top of the hill.
Yep.
And what did you see or learn about that?
I was there when that happened. It created quite a mess. First of all, you lost a lot of artillery ammunition. Part of the fire base was pretty much destroyed there where that happened. It made difficult to get helicopters in and out. It was kind of the start of the end, because it was the intensity of the fire and the incoming had picked up. Now you'd lost a lot of capabilities there when that exploded, and you couldn't provide the support you needed to the troops out in the field, and they were getting more and more activity all the time. So it was not a good situation, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the kind of July sort of, well, I guess, at what point did you learn that the fire base was going to be evacuated?
I got wounded with, I took a incoming recoilless rifle round hit nearby, and Captain Williams and I were both wounded at that time as we were headed towards the mess hall. And
What date was that?
I think that was July 21st.
Okay.
So 2 days before they evacuated the fire, or July 20th, 21st, 2 days before they evacuated the fire base.
Okay.
So I was sent back to my favorite 85th evac in Da Nang, and since that was the third time I was wounded, but I stayed in contact as a very close friend of mine, two very close friends of mine. Gary Watrous was a platoon leader with me in 2nd Platoon, and he became the recon platoon leader, and he was the liaison officer on the fire base with me for the time we were there. He was standing very close to Lucas and Tanner when they got killed, and he ended up spending 11 months in Walter Reed Hospital. Still see Gary quite once a year. We talk quite frequently, and he got screwed up pretty bad there. And then Donnie Workman, who was commander of Delta Company, 1st of the 506. He had been my roommate at West Point. I played lacrosse with him. He was in my wedding. We were quite close. And then he got decapitated or sliced in two by a helicopter blade, that was shot down when they were trying to extract his company. So I stayed in touch with what was happening, even though I was back, because a lot of people were coming through the 85th of back at that time to learn what was happening. And after I got out of the hospital, when you get your third Purple Heart, they allow you to go home if you want. And I said, no, I'm not going home. My wife was going to kill me. But I said, first of all, I lost everything on Ripcord, my cameras, everything, so I have some shopping to do. And second of all, I want to go back to the battalion. So I went back to the battalion and for one day, and it was so changed. Hardly anybody was left. Guard had come in. He was the new battalion commander. All new people everywhere. I just said, no, this isn't for me. So I spent maybe 2 more days doing some shopping and caught a flight and went home.
All right. Now, at this point, you're a regular Army officer. You've still got time left on your enlistment anyway. What do you wind up doing after you're back?
I go to Fort Carson, Colorado, and I become an infantry company commander, mechanized infantry company commander. So I like to say that early in my military career, I'm 21 when I go to Vietnam, turn 22 when I'm there. So I'm responsible for the lives of, let's say, 30 people in a combat situation a year. I come back, I go to Fort Carson, Colorado. I'm signing for millions of dollars worth of mechanized infantry equipment. I have 250 people working for me. I'm 22, 23. At very young ages, those are experiences that are very difficult to come by, and I think that they helped shape who I am and what I became, and I'm thankful for the opportunities. I don't necessarily appreciate everything I went through, but I'm thankful for the opportunities it provided me.
Okay. Now, because you had been wounded 3 times, did that sort of preclude you going back to Vietnam, or was that an option?
No, they could have sent me back to Vietnam, but the Vietnam War was winding down, and so I went to Fort Carson for about 2.5 years. I went down to the Infantry Officer Advanced Course, and I was still having a good time in the Army, so I decided I'd stay, and they sent me to graduate school.
So where did you go for graduate school?
University of Denver. I got a master's in international studies.
Okay. And then having completed that, what do they do with you?
Well, they gave me a couple of choices, but I decided I'd go out to San Jose State University and teach Army ROTC.
Okay. And during what years did you do that?
I was in graduate school from 73 to 75, and then from 75 to 79, I was at San Jose State University, and then I got out of the Army.
Okay. What was the campus climate like at San Jose State for ROTC? Did everybody get along, or was there a leftover kind of anti-war sentiment there?
It wasn't a Berkeley. San Jose State has a completely different student population than Cal Berkeley has. So actually ROTC was viewed favorably on the campus. They had quite a few people participate in it. And despite the fact that most of the people that came back from the Vietnam War were not well accepted or welcomed back into the country, that there was still some patriotic zeal and expressed by some of the young students that were attending San Jose State at that time.
Okay. Now, when you completed that, I mean, did you decide at that point that you wanted to leave the Army, or did the Army decided that it was time for you to leave the Army?
No, the Army didn't. As a matter of fact, they offered me command in generals. Well, I was there for 3 years, and then they tried to reassign me, and I didn't they wanted to send me to Alaska, and I didn't want to go to Alaska, so I said no. And by that time I had 2 kids and I didn't really want to. I hadn't been doing military things since Fort Carson. I went to school for 1 year at Fort Benning, 2 years at the University of Denver, and then I taught for 3 years. And while I was teaching, I also picked up an MBA at Santa Clara University.
Mhm.
So I said, no, I don't want to go and do soldierly things anymore. And they said, well, you still have a year commitment from graduate school, so you've got to stay for a year. I said, okay, I'll extend here at San Jose State for a year. So they extended me for a year, and then next time they came, okay, now we'll send you to the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I said, no, you try to send me to Alaska. I don't want to do this Army stuff anymore. So I got out of the Army and went to work in San Jose for FMC Corporation. My first job was selling M113s to the U.S. Army. So it was,
Well, at least you knew something about them from Fort
Yep.
Carson.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. And then did you stay with them or move around?
I had several jobs that was just when FMC Corporation got the contract to build the Bradley fighting vehicles,
Mhm.
so they were building up there. I spent about 6 months selling M113s to the U.S. Army, and then I went into the program office, and I was the liaison to the factory. And then one day I went up to the plant manager because they had encountered welding problems in DeCastro. The government inspectors were rejecting all the hulls
Mhm.
before they could get to the assembly line. So I went up to Joe, we got a real problem. My customer's upset. What are you going to do to get this resolved? We got to get these welding problems corrected and get through. He said, I'm not going to do anything about it. What do you mean you're not going to? This is a big problem. No. Next day I was the superintendent of welding. I didn't know anything about welding. We started weld school. We solved the problem. I did that for about 6 months. Then I took over a separate plant, and I made all the turrets for the Bradley fighting vehicle. And then I went into the international business office for a little bit, and then decided that I didn't want to stay in California anymore. I didn't think it was a good place to raise kids, so I asked for a transfer, and they weren't real receptive because they were having, California is a high cost of living area, San Jose, and they were expanding rapidly, and they were trying to bring people in, not let people go. But I found a sympathetic personnel person that offered me a transfer to Green Bay, Wisconsin, to their packaging systems division. So not being very good in geography, I figured out Minneapolis is pretty close to the Wisconsin border. Green Bay can't be that far away. Went up there, interviewed, took the job, started in October of '83. Yeah, October of '83. So I was in San Jose with him for 5 years after I got, or 4 years after I got out of the Army. And lo and behold, Highway 29 wasn't complete, so it took 6 hours to drive to Minneapolis from there, rather than now it's a little over 4.5. I didn't plan on staying in Green Bay, so I took a 3-year balloon mortgage, because you're coming from California, so you sell a house in California, you come to Wisconsin, you can buy a pretty nice house for what you get from selling in California. So I took a 3-year balloon mortgage, and it took me, I renewed it twice before I figured out I was going to spend time there. So I worked for the FMC there from '83 to '91, and I went to work for another company called PDQ Manufacturing that makes car wash equipment, and we became the world's largest manufacturer of touch-free car wash equipment. I was fortunate enough to be a minority owner in the business. And we sold that to Dover Corporation in 1998, and I stayed on and ran it until January 2009, and I retired.
All right. Now, you've said something about this already, but to look back over your time in the military, what do you think you took out of it, or what did you learn from it?
Well, it took me a long time in the business world to get to the level of responsibility you had at a very young age in the military. So I think that certainly prepared you well for encounters or things you'd encounter later in your life as you're pursuing a business career. I think dealing with people, the people skills you picked up in the military were extremely helpful. You know, you had a lot of time with your 25, 30 people. You learned a lot about their lives. You learned, and you apply some of those same kind. When I took over PDQ, I knew everything. I knew quite a bit about every employee. I'd pass out each check each week, talk to them, and those were the types of things I think meant a lot to people, both in the military and in the civilian world. So I think it was a very good experience. I think West Point prepared me well for this, despite some of the things you didn't like when you were there. I think it prepared me well for future endeavors as I've gone through life.
Do you think you took any baggage with you out of Vietnam, or things that created problems later?
Well, initially when I came home, I didn't sleep real well, and I was a little jumpy. I didn't talk about Vietnam for a long time. The thing that brought it out was Wisconsin. Did you ever hear of LZ Lambeau?
Oh yeah.
I was involved in LZ Lambeau, and they wrote a book, and they did a 4-hour documentary on Vietnam experiences. It was the welcome home party that the Vietnam vets never had when they came home. And I think that was a great event that helped a lot of veterans come to grips a lot later in life with what they've been through and start talking about things that they'd never talked about before.
Okay. At what point did you connect with the Ripcord Association?
I stumbled on the Ripcord Association in 1995. My son was a soccer player, and he was playing in the Olympic Festival out in Denver. So we were out there to see him, and we heard that there was this Ripcord reunion thing there. So we stopped in, my wife and I stopped in for one night for about 2 hours. So that was the first time. And then in 2000, Lieutenant Campbell, who was in my company, is a good friend of mine now.
And apparently a better map reader.
If you listen to him. He's the guy. He has two favorite sayings. He's the guardian of the truth, and his second favorite saying is, "Don't ever let the truth screw up a good story." And there was one of us that was not a very good map reader in Vietnam, and the one that Captain Vasquez spent all his time with to make sure he didn't get lost. And that one seems to remember that somebody wasn't a good map reader, but he certainly couldn't have been him, so it had to pass it on to somebody else.
All right. But anyway, but you hooked up with Jim Campbell
at the 2000 Shreveport, and then every year after that, just about every year after that, Campbell, Watrous, and we get together and we go someplace and spend some time together. Then I didn't go again until, I don't know, I went maybe 2007, 2008. There was one in Myrtle Beach, and I went to that, and I found that to be depressing. So unfortunately, there's still, the one in Shreveport was a great event because there were a lot of activities going on, an awful lot, and the community welcomed you home, and it was really a first-class thing. The one in Myrtle Beach, there's a lot of older people sitting around, still somewhat stuck in the Vietnam War, and I had moved on from that, so I didn't come again until this year. As you get older, you get a little more appreciation for some of the things you've been through, and some of the troops that had contacted me over the years. I thought, well, I'll come back and try it again. And this year was a pleasant surprise. A lot of people have moved on now and seem to have come to grips better with what happened to them in Vietnam and have gotten on with their lives. So I found this to be much better.
All right. Well, I'm very glad you chose to come out and that you took the time to share your story today.
Thank you very much.